Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today at our Cisco Duo webinar. Today we're going to be talking about a super exciting topic, how to close that Active Directory security gap finally. And in case you didn't guess already from the super long description, we have a jam-packed agenda today. We've got on with us a few of our guest speakers, and we'll be covering everything from an Active Directory-based attacks with Cisco Talos, talking about like what makes AD a target for attackers and what does that attack chain look like, and then also a huge section dedicated to what we recently announced at Cisco Live EMEA with our Active Directory defense, plus a lot of really cool demos. All right, guys, I'm super excited to be introducing our two guest speakers today. We have Jacob from Cisco Talos and Ira from our own product management team. Let's do a rapid fire Q&A so we can the audience can get to know y'all. Okay, Jacob, what brought you to the threat intelligence field and then at Talos?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. So I come from a government background. I was a intelligence analyst for the U.S. Department of Defense for several years. Prior to that, I worked in local government covering cybersecurity policy for the city of Los Angeles. One of the big things we were working on then were public-private partnerships, so working with the private sector to combat threats to the city of Los Angeles and our different departments, the Los Angeles Police Department, the fire department, all of our critical infrastructure. And there was a story behind it. I do recall working with some Cisco Talos folks way back then, and that's when I had first heard about Talos. And if for those who haven't heard of Talos, Talos is Cisco's threat intelligence and research team. We basically provide the research and incident response that supports Cisco's security portfolio. You might have heard that Cisco analyzes something like over 800 billion security events every day. And we use this information to better protect Cisco customers. You might have heard, for example, there are some open source software and tools that Cisco Talos maintains widely, including ClamAV, which is our antivirus open source software, as well as Snort for intrusion prevention. And so, yeah, I was just interested in joining a cool commercial threat intelligence team that does really great work, both for our customers and the community.
Yeah, it really sounds like Talos touches a lot of different aspects of security beyond just identity, like pretty full stack and a ton of expertise. Ira, coming to you today at Duo, like we're pretty deep in that identity space, but what other security functions have you helped build in the past?
Yeah. Before joining Duo, I worked in other security areas, specifically across cloud security and detection and response. Those included working with products like CNAPP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, endpoint security products, and also extended detection and response. Those were the main products that I worked with in the past. And now I do. That background gives me a broad perspective on how identity fits into larger security ecosystem.
Yeah, it sounds like also a pretty broad range of experiences. So what role did you play in this Active Directory defense launch specifically?
I was a product manager for Active Directory Defense. So I led this initiative from concept through launch, working closely with our talented Duo engineers, working closely with our customers, and working closely with many cross-functional teams to make sure that we deliver something meaningful and customer-driven as part of this launch.
Yeah, I remember speaking to some of the engineers and just learning a lot about like how the product was built, all the different trials and the consideration that was going into the AD defense. And so I'm super, super excited for everyone here today to take a look at what we've built and hopefully get a lot of security value out of it too. But speaking of security value, I'm sure all of you guys have one question for Jacob and just a front load a high value question. Jacob, were there any aha moments in your research or in your IR experience? Like, is there any learnings that the folks today can take away?
Um, I think what surprised me the most coming from studying state-sponsored threats and cyber criminals, and coming into Talos and watching how customers protect their networks and what enables threat actors to be able to compromise organizations. I was mostly surprised with how basic many of these attacks are. We commonly think that threat actors out there are building these complex exploits in order to hack into devices and networks, but for the most part, it seems like, if I had to give a percentage of it, I'd say maybe 90% of the cases that I've seen, 90 to 95%, are because organizations just didn't take the proper steps to protect themselves. They didn't follow the basic cyber hygiene, for example, lack of multi-factor authentication, or just using outdated software requiring patching, or, poor password use. Really, really simple things that threat actors don't need to invest financial resources and other technical means in order to hack into computers when they can just very simply log in. And so I think that's what has surprised me the most in this research.
Yeah, I think that's pretty topical for what we're discussing today. Thanks again for your time and sharing your expertise. I'm super excited to hear about, what kind of research has been done for these Active Directory-based attacks. So yeah, take it away.
Sure, yeah. So a little bit background. I did some research into Active Directory-based threats last year. If you go to the next slide, for those who are a little bit newer to Active Directory or don't know what it is, it's a Microsoft directory service that's used in Windows domain networks. It allows admins to manage users, computers, and other resources centrally, in order to provide security and scalability across the entire network. Active Directory basically acts as a database used to provide authentication and authorization across the network. Um, IT administrators are able to enforce policies, manage permissions, and it really just simplifies network security. You can see some of the key components of Active Directory. So Active Directories have domain controllers. That's the main Windows server that operates the Active Directory service. That core service, which stores and manages the data, is called the Active Directory Domain Services. And at the bottom here, you can see the different concepts, I guess we'll call them. Users and groups are individual people or collections of people that can access certain resources or not. So that's authentication and authorization. Group policies, which are used to enforce security and configuration rules on devices and users. So admins can push out group policies all at once. And then lastly, organizational units, which you can think of as these containers that organize users and devices and groups for easier management. You can go to the next slide. So Active Directory, very important to the operation of enterprise networks. Like I said, I think the statistic is about 90% of organizations use Active Directory.
Yeah.
Is that right? And so a couple important reasons why. Centralized identity and access management. It allows, it's the single source of truth for identities within a network environment. And it enables, like I said, the authentication and authorization across the network. Group policy management, like I said, admins can push out group policies widely across the network. It's very durable. So redundant, there's a lot of redundancies. So that would protect in the availability and disaster recovery. There's not any one way to take down the Active Directory. And it integrates very well with the Windows ecosystem. So many organizations that use Windows have Microsoft Exchange, Azure, and so it just integrates well, and it's scalable. So you can have a dozen people on the network, and you can have thousands and thousands of people on the network. That's why Active Directory is just so important. You can go to the next slide. And for the same reason that admins like Active Directory, is for the same reason that threat actors use it as well. Because domain admins will have a high level of access, a threat actor which compromises a domain administrator, for example, will also have a high level of access and privilege across the network. Stealth and persistence. So if a threat actor is masquerading as a certain trusted user, it's going to, be more difficult to detect them as they navigate the networks. False authentication and lateral movement. So once one device or user is compromised, threat actors can move to the next and across networks. And centralized command and control for the highest impact. And what I mean is a threat actor who gains the most access to, or the highest privilege access, is going to be able to compromise a network more widely. And so one thing that comes to mind is ransomware. Ransomware is a malware that encrypts a network or user devices, and threat actors will ask for a ransom, typically in cryptocurrency, to be paid in order for the threat actor to decrypt those networks. And so a threat actor that has access to a domain controller or the highest levels of access is going to be able to push ransomware out very widely across the system. So that centralization for Active Directory is just very critical for adversaries.
Yeah, it sounds like Active Directory is kind of a large beast of a like identity access management and more kind of foundational system for a lot of organizations. But at Cisco, we also think about identity beyond just like that IAM and beyond just that storage component. And we organize it into something called an identity graph, which includes all the different places where your users, your machines, your services are being stored. And that can span across platforms beyond just Active Directory. Maybe it's your cloud Entra ID, maybe you have something running in parallel, or maybe it's your HR systems, it's your MFA, your authentication. And all of these tools that exist in your identity environment create a lot of identity sprawl, and it's hard to have a centralized view into not just AD, but across all your different identity platforms. And so that makes it challenging to track like what these identities are doing, where they have access to, and also how to like effectively defend that new perimeter, that like all the different identity vectors and opportunities of attack there. And so before we go into the next section, I wanted to run a quick poll for our folks on call today. So, we've heard a little bit about AD. If you guys have it in your environment, if you have any other like on-premise identity, identity environment components, what are your biggest challenges with this like on-prem identity environment? Is it the complexity? Is it like getting MFA coverage? Is it compliance, or maybe managing some of those like service accounts and all the other like policy components? So while that poll question runs, I wanted to break down that 90% stat that you alluded to, Jacob, earlier. And so, yeah, despite a lot of this shift from on-prem to the cloud, getting a lot more like these SaaS products and digital transformation initiatives, 90% of the world's largest companies and also companies of all sizes still rely on Active Directory as their foundation for users and assets for a lot of the reasons that you outlined before, right? Like it's very core to it's very core to like Windows systems. It's also has been around for 2 decades. And so if your company if you've set up a company in that time, you've probably had to work with Active Directory. And maybe some organizations also stick with on-premise for their own like control, like if they have very strict data policies, or if that digital transformation is still in progress, you still have a component of Active Directory on-prem in your identity environment. But there is a lot of complexities that get hidden in AD. I feel like one of the biggest headaches is maybe like, oh, all of the policies and all of the legacy accounts and all of this like tech debt that kind of stacks up because there's things like custom configurations. You might be running multiple domains. We have a ton of like legacy systems that rely on Active Directory. Also, just the fact that it's been around for so long, we've probably seen generations of admins come in with different privileged accounts, different policies, as well as all like the temporary users, talking about non-human identities, like all the service accounts that are in AD. All of these really stack up and make it the maturity of Active Directory can hide a lot of complexity. And per what you talked about earlier, Jacob, that complexity makes Active Directory really that prime target for attackers. And so in our own Cisco Talos research, 44%, almost half of these identity-based attacks did target Active Directory. And so, Jacob, could you walk us through maybe what that typical attack chain could look like?
Yeah, absolutely. If you go to the next slide, I believe I have a case study up. This is a true story. So mid last year, summer of 2025, we saw Chillin, which is a ransomware family, target an organization. I think it was a manufacturer. And this is going to be an example of the attack chain and how Active Directory was leveraged for Chillin affiliates to deploy ransomware. They had initially authenticated to the customer's environment. They probably think they found credentials on the dark web, so they just logged in. They were able to enumerate credential stores and identify users and other passwords. We observed them dumping Active Directory credentials from domain controllers. They used a technique called Kerber roasting, and we also saw them use an open source tool called Mimikatz to extract credentials. Some of the Active Directory is prone to a lot of, because Active Directory relies on some legacy protocols like NTLM. We observed NTLM authentication against several accounts, including administrator accounts. And this ultimately allowed these threat actors to move laterally to other networks, other connected shares. I mean, that's kind of how they exploited Active Directory throughout the process. And then the impact was pretty big. So we saw them begin to remove EDR, endpoint detection and response, and security tools. We saw them beginning to exfiltrate data, and they deployed ransomware. They deleted Windows event logs, and they also deleted volume shadow copies, basically copies of the Active Directory, so that the customer would not be able to recover their Active Directory as a result of the compromise. Our incident responders assessed that this was a full domain compromise and it required a full domain rebuild. And that's pretty important because a full domain rebuild is going to be very costly. Organizations are going to experience significant operational downtime and other costs. So just a very impactful case that we observed. I think if you go to the next slide, this just shows like a typical attack chain leveraging Active Directory. So there's a lot of techniques we've observed. Some of the most popular ones we observed are listed here: password spraying, phishing, MFA attacks, dark web discovery to identify credentials. Attackers will use will conduct attack mapping. In other words, they'll use tools like AD Find, AD Explorer, or commercial versions of open source tools to map out weaknesses, security weaknesses in an organization's network in order to identify effective paths to exploitation. These are some of the other credential access techniques: brute forcing, dumping the SAM and TDS files, the LSAS, NTLM relay attacks. And ultimately, the goal here is to access credentials, escalate privileges, move laterally, and as I think I was talking a little bit earlier, gain that highest level of privileged access possible in order to make the biggest impact. In addition to ransomware, we see business email compromise as a result, stolen identities, data theft extortion. Threat actors will steal sensitive files and then extort organizations for money. And then certainly service disruption, which costs organizations.
Yeah, Thanks so much for that overview. It sounds like there's a lot of vulnerabilities when it comes to Active Directory, but also a lot of these like identity-based attacks. It feels like with modern protections, it might be possible to like prevent a lot of these access attempts, especially when we think about like session hijacking or the phishing attacks. And obviously, Duo is pretty well known for multi-factor authentication, but we have been super excited to talk about Active Directory defense, and I'm excited to have Ira here to walk through our solution because AD is often like a vulnerability still when it comes to MFA and when it comes to some of these more advanced like or modern identity protections, just because of how legacy that system is. And so I'm gonna hand it over to Ira now to walk us through a really exciting announcement from Cisco Duo on our Active Directory defense launch. So Ira, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Kat. And wow, those were some scary stories that Jacob told us. And here at Duo, we are committed to the idea that we want our customers to help our customers prevent any of those from happening. And that's why we invested so much time and effort into this new solution, this new project that we are launching. So I'm really happy and excited today to share a little bit more about our solution, Active Directory Defense, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, and you will be also able to see a little demo of what it looks like in practice. So when we talk about Active Directory Defense as a solution at Duo, we mainly talk about two main pillars. It's easy to think about it from these two main pillars. The first pillar is visibility. Remember when Kat talked about all of those difficulties around the configurations and generations of admin changes and whatnot, those make it really difficult to really know what is happening in your Active Directory, or to really know if there is a vulnerability, or if there is something in Active Directory that shouldn't be there. So this is where our visibility pillar comes in, because our goal is to add that visibility, add that ease of understanding and that intelligence into Active Directory. And this is where our solution that is called Cisco Identity Intelligence, or CII, comes in. If you haven't already used it before, if you're not familiar with it, this is our solution for visibility into various identity components in the organization. And now we are adding Active Directory visibility to it. So that's one pillar of the Active Directory defense. And now on the other hand, there is protection pillar. And protection pillar is all about blocking that unauthorized access, right? We don't want attackers to access our resources, especially some of the resources that are specifically critical to organizations. So the whole protection pillar of this solution is about blocking access to those resources that have been historically difficult to protect. And they have been historically difficult to protect because they don't natively support those modern security measures like MFA. And this is what we are solving for here at Duo. We are adding that MFA, multi-factor authentication, into those authentication flows that have not been protected before. So again, the two pillars, visibility and protection, and they make up the solution that we call Duo Active Directory Defense. And we'll dive into each of the pillars now, and we'll go to the next slide to talk about visibility in more details. So again, we now know why we need visibility into Active Directory, right? We've had those great examples of what happens when organizations do not have a good visibility. So with Cisco Identity Intelligence and integrations into Active Directory, we now can report on things that are happening there. We can report on on-premises compliance. We can run, Cisco Identity Intelligence is known for its checks or insights, so we can run those continuous hygiene checks and alert you, our customers, if we see something that is maybe shouldn't be in your Active Directory. Things like inactive users, maybe guest accounts that need to be cleaned up, some password hygiene issues, things like that. If you're syncing your Active Directory with cloud providers, we can also surface some of the identity drift. If there are any issues with that sync, we can notice it and help you, our customers, notice it. And we can also detect Active Directory misconfigurations. And all of that is happening in Cisco Identity Intelligence, and we are going to see a really little brief demo of how that looks in the product. So you will see the UI. This is our Identity Intelligence at Duo. And we will first start with having a look at that integration. So Active Directory integration is something that has been requested by many of our customers, and we now have it. So let's have a look how it looks. If you go to the integrations page and you go to add an integration, you will see this new Active Directory tile. So giving it a name, description if you'd like, and then we won't go through the configuration steps in here, but I just wanted to show you that this integration exists, and this is what powers all of those insights. Now, once you configure the integration, you will be able to see all of your users from Active Directory, and we can click into one. This user has been merged, the information about this user has been merged from all of the different providers that we have connected to Cisco Identity Intelligence. You can see the details that we have collected from Active Directory. You can see some on your left, and then if you click into more, you can see everything that we have collected about this user. This can be really helpful in the investigation. You can also see the groups that this user belongs to. So again, helpful for some cleanup, helpful for investigations. And then we will go to our insights, to our checks. You can select those that are compatible with Active Directory, and those are those primary posture checks that can help you start your Active Directory cleanup. Here we're looking at inactive users. We have clicked into one specific inactive user that we have found in Active Directory. Most companies, there will be way more. Once you review the information, you can decide, okay, you can see when this user has, last successful login, you can review the information. And then, you can also take action from the UI here. For example, you can create a ticket and to deprovision this user, because you don't want those users in your Active Directory anyway. And that's a brief demo. And I have a quote here that is from one of our customers. The solution is now available to all of the customers. But when we were going through the alpha phase of releasing this integration, we had this quote from one of our customers that says, the check that you have just seen, actually another one, but a similar one, never logged in check, is so valuable because the customer was able to clean up 150 accounts just, in a matter of maybe half an hour or so. And that might sound like a basic task, but I was listening to what Jacob was saying about his aha moments here, right? And he mentioned a lot of those attacks, they actually start from some of those basic hygiene steps that companies tend to ignore. So, being diligent about cleaning up those inactive accounts, never logged in accounts, and addressing those password hygiene issues is really something that we recommend our customers to start with when they start with our Active Directory defense capabilities. So that's a really great testimonial that we've heard from our customer here.
Yeah, it sounds like posture management and general hygiene of your identity environment is pretty important, especially as we see like more and more identities coming in and across different platforms in addition to Active Directory. And so there's this figure here that came from the Spectre Ops like 2025 State of Attack Path Management Report. And we can see that the number of potential attack paths, like some of the ones Jacob described earlier, it grows exponentially as the identities sprawl. And so, from 20,000 identities to 40,000 identities, we go from 75 million potential attack paths all the way up to like 725 million, which is a huge jump. And then another thing to note is we were talking a lot about, user identities and employees, but identity count is also, it's more than just human identities. It also can include the service accounts or the certificates and machine identities that live across your different identity storages as well. And then obviously one of the hottest topics in the market right now is how that identity stress gets exacerbated with that proliferation of AI and especially AI agents. Because in 2024, that ratio of machine to human identities was about 20 to 1, like, service accounts and certificates and whatnot. But now there's estimates like from Forrester that says that that ratio can be as high as 92 to 1 between all the service accounts and new agents and the new adoption of technology. And so that's why we are really excited to be partnering with experts who understand all the different challenges that comes with attack paths, have done a lot of research, and know how to remediate a lot of the more common risks that come with this greater identity sprawl. And so, I'm going to pass it to you for one of our integration partners.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Spectre Ops and attack path management, another puzzle to that visibility that I have talked about is our another integration with a partner, and we are integrating with Bloodhound Enterprise in order to bring some of those attack path insights into Cisco Identity Intelligence. Once we bring those insights around attack paths, it will really help our customers prioritize investigation and remediation. Will really add that additional puzzle, additional piece of visibility that will enrich what we already have with our posture checks that you have seen in the demo. So on the screen here, you can see an example of the check that we also have that is specific for attack path alert. And again, I'm kind of thinking about what Jacob said about attackers trying to map out those effective paths to exploitation. This is us. Us kind of helping our customers to map it out ahead of the attackers and to make sure they close out those paths to those critical assets with the help of this integration with CII and Bloodhound Enterprise. And that closes out one of the pillars that we have talked about, that it was about visibility into Active Directory. And we are going to pivot into the second part of the solution, which is about protection, which is about, again, blocking unauthorized access is all that is. Blocking unauthorized access where attackers are not supposed to have that access. We are talking about adding MFA into those legacy flows. And so specifically when we talk about protection, we talk about one of the things that Duo is really known for, Duo is really strong at, is that multi-factor authentication. And we talk about adding that MFA on the DC specifically to protect those legacy applications, those protocols, those admin protocols, command line protocols that actually are difficult to protect for the customers. With those features that we are introducing here, we help our customers remove administrative workarounds to add MFA into their flows. And it's one workflow for end users, because if our customers are already using Duo for other to protect other cloud applications, for example, or some others, this is the same experience, the same familiar MFA experience for our end users. But also now it's also on those on-prem applications that have not been covered before. And we have another poll question here. So while we are going to talk about some more details around protection, let's find out of the organizations, out of the people that we have on the call today, does your organization still rely on those legacy protocols? Specifically, we are talking about Kerberos and NTLM authentications. We kind of know from Gartner that over 50% of organizations still use those authentications, but we would like to also see how that number shapes among our attendees here on this call. So let us know. Take that poll, and we will move on to talk a little bit more about the protection piece of our solution. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we integrate directly on the domain controller to insert that MFA broadly across all of the Active Directory authentications. I have mentioned the protocols that we have covered, but just think about it. If there is a homegrown application, if there is any kind of manufacturing application, or even if it's some type of file share, for example, and the authentication goes out to AD, then we are able now to intercept that authentication. That was not something that we were able to do before, but that's because of this new feature. We can hold that authentication and we can let you decide, or based on your policies, whether you're going to trigger an MFA challenge on that authentication or not. And we are going to see two quick demos of those solutions that we have talked about. And we are going to start with this one, which is specifically on the feature that is holds those authentications that go out to AD. So we are going to see a regular AD authentications. This is someone, a user, logging into vCenter. They just went through the username and password, and they're in. There is no MFA on this specific flow. But now what we are going to do, we already have the Duo integration installed here. We are going to add this user into Duo Enforce AD group. And that will tell us that we want this user to authenticate and to use MFA. So now it's the same process. We are going to actually log out of the vCenter here, and we are going to, the user is going to go through the same process again. The first factor, username, password, pretty similar. But now that they log in, they get the familiar Duo push. And they're in. No additional friction for the user, but now they have that additional protection, and they probably use Duo for any other of their authentications. So again, it's a familiar user experience for our user. That was the first demo, and now we are going to see, again, a short second demo. This one is about protecting command line tools. So you're going to see two authentications. One of them is PowerShell, and one of them is Windows SSH. So we're going to start with PowerShell. And again, this is specific to like a specific admin use case. You will see that we are using Duo verified push to log in this case. And you see the process to go through. The challenge went through and it was completed. That was PowerShell session. And now you're looking at the Windows SSH session. Again, it's similar looking from the end user perspective. You get a Duo verified push as part of this flow. It's all approved. It's all smooth and easy. But think about how much more secure that process is now that you have that verified push added somewhere where it was not before. And with that is the end of the demo. Think again, to sum up on the solution again, think about those two pillars, visibility and protection, helping you see what is happening in your Active Directory, and also protecting and blocking unauthorized access. And with that, I'm going to give the floor back to Kat.
Thanks, Ira, and thanks for walking us through all those demos. Yeah, just bringing us all back to that identity graph image we saw earlier in the talk. Now that we've added that Active Directory piece in that web, we're able to do a lot of the remediation and the hygiene checks that both Ira and Jacob touched on. So being able to correlate that behavior data across multiple different IDPs and identity storages means that you can find where there's excessive privileges or maybe there's dormant accounts. And also now with Active Directory Defense, be able to directly insert MFA into those vulnerable authentication flows with ease and with that same great end user experience that Duo is pretty known for. And so we're about last few minutes of the presentation. I want to pass it back to Jacob to walk us through some final recommendations from the Talos perspective, since identity is pretty top of mind for everyone here today. So Jacob, what can they do?
Yeah, I mean, I would leave viewers with a couple recommendations from our Talos incident response team based on many of the engagements we have observed involving compromised AD environments. Some of these you've probably heard before. So implementing the principle of least privilege, restricting administrative privileges to ensure that users and service accounts only have the minimum rights necessary for their tasks, enforcing strong passwords, so requiring long, complex passwords for all accounts, especially service accounts, requiring MFA using a solution like Duo on all user accounts, particularly those with elevated permissions or that have remote access capabilities. You should be auditing and monitoring Active Directory activity and enable logging and continuous monitoring of AD activity to detect unusual behaviors such as privilege escalation, account enumeration, and other failed logins. You should restrict physical and network access to domain controllers and apply strict controls on who can replicate or synchronize data, especially to prevent attacks like DC sync attacks. And then patch and update regularly, segregate administrative workstations, and implement Kerberos restrictions. Those are probably the kind of the 8 core recommendations I would leave viewers with.
Yeah, just 8 super easy things, huh? No. Yeah, thank you so much for walking us through some of the recommendations. Hopefully some of the viewers here know maybe what's next for their org to help boost their security. But in case y'all on the call weren't aware, we have a expanded portfolio now of a full IAM security solution at Duo. In addition to the Active Directory Defense, which is part of the Duo Advantage tier right in the middle, we also have Cisco Identity Intelligence, part of Duo Advantage, session theft protection with Duo Passport. And then for all of our customers in Duo Essentials, we have a full IDP like user storage now with Duo Directory, the ability to go complete passwordless, proximity verification with Bluetooth, low energy, and a super strong AI assistant that can help recommend which new features and policies are most helpful for your organization. We also recently were awarded the Customer's Choice for User Auth at Gartner. So, love Duo, and hopefully your users also really enjoy that end user experience. And with that, thank you for tuning in to this webinar today on Active Directory Defense. Thank you, Ira, and thank you, Jacob, so much for your time. If anyone on the call is interested in learning more about our AD defense solution, you can go to duo.com, or if you're in the market to look and understand what's new in MFA and what's new in IAM, we've got 2 brand new 2026 guides for you guys to just think about, what are ways to improve our identity security in the new year. Jacob, what is this year in review?
Yeah, and so in 1 week, on the 26th, Talos, we are launching our 2025 annual year in review report, looking at all of the threats from 2025. And identity and access management threats are a pretty big part of that. So just a little sneak preview. So if anyone is interested in reading about the threats seen in the last year, that'll be posted on talosintelligence.com.
Cool. Thanks so much, Jacob. And thanks so much again, everyone, for tuning in today and giving us your time. Hopefully you'll learn something new about Active Directory. And if you have any questions, please reach out. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks so much.